The year is 2025, and the global economy is, well, reeling. In just a single week, a staggering $10 trillion vanished from global stock markets. This financial earthquake, a direct consequence of former President Donald Trump's reignited trade wars and aggressive tariff policies, sent shockwaves through every corner of the world. These weren't just numbers on a screen, they represented real losses for investors, businesses, and everyday people. The economic aftershocks continue to reverberate, exposing the profound and lasting consequences of protectionist policies on a global scale. Trump's decision to slap a 10% tariff on all imports, along with even heftier tariffs targeting specific countries like China, ignited a firestorm of economic uncertainty. The markets, always sensitive to instability, responded with a swift and brutal sell-off. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, a key indicator of the American economy, plummeted, and the tech-heavy Nasdaq suffered even greater losses, reflecting the global nature of the technology sector and its vulnerability to trade disruptions. The impact wasn't confined to the United States either. European markets, already grappling with their own set of economic challenges, were also caught in the crossfire. The interconnectedness of the global economy meant that no nation was immune to the fallout. Asian markets, particularly those heavily reliant on trade with China, experienced significant volatility. This financial earthquake served as a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of the global economy and the potentially devastating consequences of protectionist policies. It exposed the fallacy of the easy win narrative often associated with tariffs, highlighting instead the complex and far-reaching repercussions of such actions. The $10 trillion shockwave was, well, a wake-up call, forcing the world to confront the economic and political realities of a world increasingly divided by trade barriers. While the stock market crash painted a dramatic picture of the tariffs' immediate impact, the pain inflicted by these policies extended far beyond Wall Street. It reached deep into the heartland of America and beyond. Farmers, the backbone of the American economy, found themselves caught in the crosshairs of a trade war they didn't start and, frankly, couldn't afford.
In Iowa, we exported $13.5 billion worth of agricultural products in 2023. But these tariffs, they hit us like a ton of bricks. Soybean farmers like me, we relied heavily on exports to China, and then almost overnight that market just disappeared. Prices for soybeans plummeted. I mean, we're talking about struggling just to break even here.
The tariffs didn't just target exports. They also drove up the cost of essential agricultural inputs. Fertilizers, equipment, machinery, much of it imported, became significantly more expensive, squeezing already thin profit margins. And the pain? It wasn't confined to farmers. Consumers, both in the United States and abroad, felt the pinch as well. The tariffs disrupted global supply chains, making it more expensive to produce and transport everything from electronics to clothing. These increased costs were passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices, fueling inflation and eroding purchasing power.
What people don't realize is these tariffs, they don't just hurt farmers. They hurt everyone. It's a ripple effect, and it's devastating.
The tariffs' impact on the agricultural sector served as a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of the global economy and the unintended consequences of protectionist policies. What might have seemed like a targeted measure aimed at protecting domestic industries often had ripple effects that were felt far beyond the intended target. The tariffs' bitter harvest underscored the delicate balance of global trade and the importance of open markets for economic prosperity.
There will be no pain for American companies and workers. That's what I can assure you today.
Those were the words of White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, words that would unfortunately come back to haunt her. The Trump administration, faced with mounting economic fallout from the tariffs, scrambled to contain the damage. But Leavitt's claim, tone-deaf and demonstrably false, stood in stark contrast to the economic realities unfolding across the country. Farmers, facing financial ruin, scoffed at such an assertion. Manufacturers, contending with higher input costs and disrupted supply chains, watched their profits dwindle. And consumers, well, they grappled with rising prices for everything from groceries to gasoline.
We are confident that this policy will ultimately benefit the American economy.
But those words, intended to reassure, rang hollow to those grappling with the very real consequences of the tariffs. The disconnect between the administration's rhetoric and the economic realities on the ground further eroded public trust. It fueled the perception that the administration was out of touch with the concerns of ordinary Americans and perhaps more interested in scoring political points than in protecting the economic well-being of the country. The no-pain promise, exposed as a cruel illusion, became a symbol of the administration's disconnect from the economic realities faced by millions of Americans. The administration's attempts to downplay the economic pain inflicted by the tariffs backfired spectacularly. It highlighted the dangers of prioritizing political expediency over economic reality. The no-pain promise, revealed as a cynical falsehood, served as a stark reminder of the human cost of misguided economic policies. At the heart of Trump's tariff turmoil lay a fundamental flaw, the very formula used to justify these protectionist measures. The formula, a simplistic calculation of exports minus imports divided by imports, was met with widespread criticism from economists and even some of Trump's own supporters, who decried it as irrational and economically unsound.
You know, it's like trying to measure your intelligence by weighing your head. Seriously, who thought this was a good idea?
Ken Langone, the billionaire co-founder of Home Depot and a longtime Republican donor, publicly criticized the tariff formula, calling it completely irrational. Langone, no stranger to the intricacies of global trade, argued that the formula failed to account for the complexities of modern supply chains and the interconnectedness of the global economy. He warned that the tariffs, far from bringing back manufacturing jobs, would likely lead to job losses and higher prices for consumers.
And of course, John Oliver couldn't resist. He skewered the formula, saying it reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of how global trade works. Honestly, a viral segment and a cartoon of someone weighing their head might have explained it better than the administration ever could.
The widespread criticism of the tariff formula underscored the flawed logic underpinning Trump's trade policies. It highlighted the dangers of relying on simplistic solutions to complex economic problems and the importance of sound economic analysis in policymaking. The formula, far from a magic bullet to revive American manufacturing, proved to be a recipe for economic disaster. Adding to the sense of unease and uncertainty surrounding the tariffs was the Trump administration's inconsistent messaging on the issue. Trump, known for his unpredictable and often contradictory pronouncements, sent mixed signals about his commitment to tariffs, leaving businesses and governments around the world guessing about his true intentions.
In one moment, he would boldly declare, "No delay in tariffs, no way." And then, just like that, he'd turn around and announce a 90-day postponement. It's hard to plan for the future when the rules seem to change by the minute.
This erratic behavior, characterized by sudden reversals and contradictory statements, created a climate of uncertainty that was deeply unsettling for businesses trying to plan for the future.
It's as if the policies were less about addressing trade imbalances and more about scoring political points. The inconsistency made it nearly impossible to understand whether there was a real strategy or just a series of whims.
The Trump administration's inconsistent messaging on tariffs underscored the chaotic and unpredictable nature of his presidency. It highlighted the dangers of governing by whim and the importance of clear, consistent communication in matters of economic policy. The tariffs, rather than a tool for economic renewal, became a symbol of the administration's own internal contradictions. The legacy of Trump's tariff turmoil extends far beyond the immediate economic fallout. The tariffs, by disrupting global supply chains, undermining international trade norms, and fueling geopolitical tensions, have left a lasting mark on the global economy and the political landscape.
One of the biggest concerns is the erosion of trust in the global trading system. When countries start imposing tariffs like this, it's seen as a violation of the rules that have held global trade together for decades. Retaliatory measures follow, and suddenly, cooperation between nations starts to crumble.
This breakdown in trust has made it more difficult to address shared economic challenges and has raised the specter of a world increasingly divided by trade barriers.
And let's not forget the chilling effect on business investment. Companies thrive on stability and predictability, but tariffs have created so much uncertainty that businesses are delaying investments or even moving production to other countries. That's not exactly a recipe for growth.
The tariffs, while ostensibly aimed at reviving American manufacturing and protecting domestic jobs, have had the opposite effect. They have led to job losses in industries reliant on global supply chains, increased costs for businesses and consumers, and fueled uncertainty and instability in the global economy.
At the end of the day, these tariffs have become a textbook example of the dangers of protectionism. If anything, they remind us of how vital a rules-based trading system is for global prosperity.
The tariffs, far from a solution to America's economic woes, have become a symbol of the perils of protectionism and the importance of sound economic policies in a connected world. Well, folks, it seems even the European Union, after months of standing up to Trump's trade antics, has blinked, Remember when the EU threatened to slap tariffs on Harley-Davidsons and Kentucky bourbon? Those were the days. Now, they've seemingly caved and accepted Trump's zero tariff for zero tariff deal. Don't get too excited. It's not exactly a win-win. The EU, while agreeing to lower some tariffs, cleverly slipped in retaliatory tariffs on over 20 billion euros worth of US goods. This is their response to unresolved trade disputes because, Trump's idea of negotiation is yelling at someone until they give in. The EU's retaliation will be rolled out gradually, starting with 3.9 billion euros worth of tariffs next week. Now, here's where things get interesting. Trump, in a move that surprised absolutely no one, slapped tariffs on pretty much everyone, except, oddly enough, most of our allies. However, after a good old-fashioned talking to from Wall Street bigwigs, he hit the pause button, giving everyone 90 days to, you guessed it, negotiate. The EU, not wanting to be left out of the tariff-free party, also agreed to hold fire on their retaliatory measures. This whole thing is like watching a toddler play with a loaded gun. Except the toddler is the President of the United States, and the loaded gun is the global economy. It's terrifying, folks. While the EU tiptoes around Trump's tariff tantrums, China is having none of it. They're standing their ground, refusing to be bullied by the self-proclaimed tariff man. Trump, in his infinite wisdom, slapped a whopping 145% tariff on some Chinese goods. Yes, you heard that right, 145%. He seems to think trade wars are easy to win. Spoiler alert, they're not. China, being the economic powerhouse it is, isn't backing down. They've retaliated with their own tariffs, hitting back at American industries. Hollywood films, forget about it. China's curbing those imports. And those soybeans Trump promised farmers China would buy. Well, China's found new suppliers like Brazil. This trade war is a lose-lose situation. And the only winner so far seems to be Brazil. Who knew they'd be the unlikely victor in Trump's economic demolition derby? Remember when Trump promised to make America great again? Well, he forgot to mention that part of that plan involved making everything more expensive for Americans. Thanks to his tariffs, the prices of everyday goods are going through the roof. Want some delicious fruit from Brazil, or be prepared to pay a premium? Craving some Vietnamese coffee? Get ready to shell out some serious dough. The American consumer is caught in the middle of this trade war, and we're the ones feeling the pinch. Our wallets are getting lighter, and the only thing getting heavier is the feeling of dread in the pit of our stomachs. Even the US bike industry, which relies heavily on Chinese manufacturing, is bracing for impact. We're talking potential price hikes of up to 50%. So much for those relaxing weekend bike rides. Thanks, Trump. Trump's chaotic approach to trade has sent shockwaves through the global economy. The stock market is in free fall, wiping out trillions of dollars in wealth. Retirement accounts are dwindling faster than Trump's attention span during a national security briefing. Even Goldman Sachs, the financial soothsayers of Wall Street, are predicting a recession. But the economic fallout is just the tip of the iceberg. Trump's erratic behavior, from his rambling press conferences to his baseless accusations against Canada, apparently they're a drug den now, has left our allies bewildered and our enemies emboldened. The world is shifting, and the United States, under Trump's leadership, is looking less and less like a reliable partner. Countries are forging new alliances, strengthening ties with China, and looking for leadership anywhere but Washington. The question is, can the US economy and its reputation recover from the damage inflicted by the tariff man? The world of international trade is in disarray. Former allies are at odds. Global supply chains are disrupted, and at the heart of this turmoil lies a series of aggressive tariff policies enacted by the United States. These tariffs, intended to protect American industries and jobs, have instead triggered a chain reaction of retaliatory measures from major trading partners. This has ignited a trade war that threatens the interconnected global economy. The impact of these tariffs extends far beyond simple economic calculations. They have strained diplomatic relationships, eroded trust between nations, and called into question the United States' commitment to the rules-based international order it helped establish after World War II. The tariff war, therefore, is not just about economic competition. It is a battle for global influence and the future shape of the international system. The initial tremors of this trade war were felt most acutely in industries directly targeted by tariffs. Steel and aluminum producers, agricultural sectors, and manufacturing industries on all sides of the disputes faced immediate challenges. Prices for raw materials surged, disrupting production lines and squeezing profit margins. The uncertainty generated by the tariffs also had a chilling effect on investment, as businesses grew wary of committing capital in such a volatile environment. As the trade war has escalated, its reach has extended far beyond these initial targets. The interconnected nature of the global economy means that tariffs on one product or sector can have ripple effects across entire industries and even national economies. Consumers, too, have begun to feel the pinch as the increased costs faced by businesses are passed down in the form of higher prices for everyday goods. The tariff war has thus become a multidimensional challenge with far-reaching consequences for the global economy and the future of international relations. The tariff war has had a profound impact on long-standing geopolitical alliances. The United States, once a beacon of free trade and multilateralism, is increasingly seen as an unreliable partner by its traditional allies. This shift in perception has driven many countries to seek new economic and strategic partnerships, often with China. China, with its rapidly growing economy and its ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, has positioned itself as an alternative to the United States on the world stage. It has capitalized on the tariff war by strengthening ties with countries alienated by US policies. China has signed new trade agreements, invested heavily in infrastructure projects, and offered generous loan packages to nations eager to reduce their dependence on the US. This shift towards China is particularly evident in Europe. The European Union, traditionally a close ally of the United States, has been deeply critical of the Trump administration's tariff policies. The EU has responded with retaliatory tariffs of its own, and has sought to diversify its trade relationships. This includes accelerating negotiations for a comprehensive investment agreement with China, despite concerns over human rights and unfair trade practices. The tariff war has also driven closer cooperation between China and Russia. Facing economic sanctions from the West, Russia has increasingly turned to China as a market for its energy exports and as a source of investment. The two countries have deepened their military cooperation and have conducted joint naval exercises in a show of force that has alarmed Western observers. The strengthening of the China-Russia axis is a direct consequence of the US's retreat from multilateralism and its pursuit of unilateral trade policies. While the Trump administration has touted the tariff war as a means to protect American jobs and revitalize domestic industries, the economic reality has been far more complex. The tariffs have undoubtedly benefited some sectors such as steel and aluminum production, which have seen a resurgence in demand and employment. However, these gains have been overshadowed by the broader negative impact on the US economy. One of the most immediate consequences of the tariffs has been a sharp increase in the price of imported goods. This has fueled inflation, eroding the purchasing power of American consumers and putting a strain on household budgets. The agricultural sector, once a pillar of the US economy, has been hit particularly hard by retaliatory tariffs from China and other trading partners. Farmers have seen demand for their products plummet, leading to a surplus of crops, falling prices, and farm bankruptcies. The manufacturing sector, which the tariffs were ostensibly designed to protect, has also suffered collateral damage. Manufacturers rely on a complex global supply chain for components and raw materials. Disruptions to this supply chain caused by tariffs have led to higher input costs, production delays, and lost business. Many manufacturers have been forced to absorb these increased costs, squeezing their profit margins and making it difficult to compete in the global marketplace. The tariffs have also had a chilling effect on foreign investment in the United States. Businesses are hesitant to invest in a country that is engaged in a trade war with its largest trading partners. The uncertainty surrounding US trade policy has made it difficult for businesses to plan for the future, leading to a decline in investment and job creation. The tariff war, therefore, has not only failed to deliver on its promises of economic prosperity, but it has also exacerbated existing economic challenges and undermined the long-term competitiveness of the US economy. To Section 4, the maple leaf bites back Canada's retaliation. Canada, once considered a steadfast ally and a crucial trading partner of the United States, has emerged as a formidable opponent in the tariff war. The Canadian government, angered by US tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, has responded with a series of retaliatory measures that have targeted key US industries and have strained relations between the two countries. One of Canada's most potent weapons in the tariff war has been its control over electricity exports to the United States. Ontario, Canada's most populous province and a major electricity producer, has imposed a 25% tariff on electricity exports to the US. This has added hundreds of thousands of dollars per day to the energy bills of American businesses and households, particularly in states like Michigan and New York that are heavily reliant on Canadian electricity. In addition to electricity tariffs, Canada has also imposed retaliatory tariffs on a wide range of US imports. These tariffs have targeted products such as beer, vegetables, footwear, and cosmetics. The Canadian government has carefully selected these products to inflict maximum economic pain on US industries, while minimizing the impact on Canadian consumers. This strategic approach has put pressure on the US government to back down from its tariffs, but it has also led to higher prices for consumers on both sides of the border. The Canadian government has also taken steps to reduce its economic dependence on the United States. It has sought to diversify its trade relationships by pursuing new trade agreements with countries in Europe, Asia, and Latin America. It has also invested heavily in infrastructure projects designed to enhance trade with non-US partners. These efforts are part of a broader strategy to reduce Canada's vulnerability to US economic pressure and to assert its independence on the world stage. Section 5. A world engulfed. The global trade war. The trade war initiated by the United States has quickly escalated into a global conflict engulfing major economies around the world. China, the European Union, and other trading powers have all responded to US tariffs with retaliatory measures of their own. This tit-for-tat escalation has disrupted global supply chains, increased costs for businesses and consumers, and injected a dangerous level of uncertainty into the global economy. China, the world's second-largest economy and America's largest trading partner, has been the primary target of US tariffs. The Trump administration has imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods, ranging from electronics and machinery to clothing and footwear. China has responded in kind, targeting US agricultural products, automobiles, and other key exports. The trade war between the US and China has had a significant impact on both economies, slowing growth, reducing investment, and fueling inflation. The European Union, another major trading partner of the United States, has also been drawn into the tariff war. The EU has imposed retaliatory tariffs on US goods in response to US tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. The EU has also challenged the legality of US tariffs at the World Trade Organization, arguing that they violate international trade rules. The trade dispute between the US and the EU has strained transatlantic relations and has created uncertainty for businesses operating on both sides of the Atlantic. The global trade war has also ensnared countries that are not directly involved in the initial disputes. Countries that rely heavily on exports to the US or China have seen demand for their products decline as the trade war has dampened economic growth in those countries. Developing countries in particular have been vulnerable to the negative spillover effects of the trade war, as they often lack the economic resilience to withstand prolonged disruptions to global trade. Section 6. The Gathering Storm, Domestic Backlash and the Future of Global Order. As the tariff war drags on, it is fueling a growing backlash within the United States and around the world. Businesses, farmers and consumers are feeling the economic pain of higher prices, lost markets and economic uncertainty. This is leading to a loss of public support for the tariffs and is putting pressure on policymakers to find a way out of the trade war. Within the United States, opposition to the tariffs has been growing, even among some of President Trump's traditional supporters. Farmers, who have been hit hard by retaliatory tariffs from China and other countries, have been vocal in their criticism of the Trump administration's trade policies. Businesses facing higher costs for imported materials and components have also begun to express concerns about the long-term impact of the tariffs on the U.S. economy. The tariff war has also eroded America's standing in the world. The United States, once seen as a champion of free trade and a reliable partner, is now viewed by many countries as a protectionist and unpredictable actor. This has damaged America's reputation and has made it more difficult for the U.S. to advance its interests on the global stage. The tariff war, therefore, represents a significant challenge to the existing global order. It has undermined the rules-based trading system that has underpinned global prosperity for decades. It has fueled geopolitical tensions and has eroded trust between nations, and it has raised serious questions about the future of American leadership in a world that is increasingly defined by competition rather than cooperation. The path forward is unclear, but one thing is certain. The world cannot afford to continue down this destructive path. The stakes are too high and the potential consequences are too dire. The time for dialogue, compromise and a return to the principles of free and fair trade is now. President Trump's new budget proposal has sent shockwaves through the nation, exposing a stark divide between the wealthy and everyone else. This plan, lauded by some as a bold step towards fiscal responsibility, is, in reality, a calculated dismantling of the social safety net, jeopardizing the well-being of millions of ordinary Americans. The budget's drastic cuts to essential programs like Medicaid, education and agriculture, coupled with massive tax breaks for corporations and the ultra-rich, paint a clear picture of the administration's priorities. At the heart of this budget lies a fundamental imbalance. While the wealthy stand to gain enormously from tax cuts, the most vulnerable in our society face devastating consequences. The budget's deep cuts to Medicaid, a lifeline for low-income families and individuals with disabilities, threaten to push millions into poverty and despair. Education, the cornerstone of a thriving democracy, faces a similar fate, with proposed cuts jeopardizing the futures of countless children and undermining the nation's long-term economic prospects. This budget is not about fiscal responsibility. It is about redistributing wealth upwards, further enriching the privileged few at the expense of the many. By prioritizing the interests of the wealthy over the needs of ordinary Americans, this budget represents a fundamental betrayal of the American dream. The consequences of this skewed approach are far-reaching, threatening to exacerbate inequality, undermine social mobility, and erode the very fabric of our society. The Trump administration argues that these cuts are necessary to curb government spending and reduce the deficit. However, this argument falls flat when considering the simultaneous implementation of massive tax cuts, primarily benefiting the wealthiest Americans and large corporations. These tax cuts, projected to add trillions to the national debt, expose the hypocrisy at the heart of this budget proposal. It is a budget that prioritizes short-term gains for the few over the long-term well-being of the nation. Medicaid, the federal health insurance program for low-income Americans, stands as a prime target in Trump's proposed budget. The administration's plan to slash $880 billion from this vital program over the next decade has sparked widespread alarm among healthcare providers, patient advocates, and ordinary Americans who rely on Medicaid for their healthcare needs. These cuts would have a devastating ripple effect throughout the healthcare system, leaving millions without access to essential medical services. For many low-income families, Medicaid is not just a safety net, but a lifeline. It provides access to vital healthcare services, including preventative care, doctor's visits, hospital stays, and prescription drugs. Without Medicaid, many families would be forced to choose between putting food on the table and seeking medical attention for themselves or their loved ones. The proposed cuts would disproportionately impact children, seniors, and individuals with disabilities, the most vulnerable members of our society who rely heavily on Medicaid for their healthcare needs. The impact of these cuts would extend far beyond individual patients. Rural hospitals, already struggling to stay afloat, would face closure as Medicaid reimbursements dwindle. These hospitals serve as critical healthcare hubs for rural communities, often providing the only source of medical care for miles around. Their closure would create healthcare deserts, leaving residents with limited options for medical attention. The ripple effect of these closures would be devastating, impacting not only healthcare access but also local economies and the overall well-being of rural communities. The proposed Medicaid cuts are not simply a matter of fiscal policy. They are a matter of life and death for millions of Americans. By stripping away healthcare access for the most vulnerable, these cuts represent a fundamental abdication of our responsibility to care for one another. The human cost of these cuts would be immeasurable, pushing countless families into poverty, despair, and preventable suffering. Education, the bedrock of a thriving democracy and a robust economy, faces a perilous future under President Trump's proposed budget. The administration's plan to slash $400 billion from education spending over the next decade represents a significant departure from the nation's historical commitment to investing in the potential of its children. These cuts would have far-reaching consequences, impacting students at all levels of education, from early childhood programs to college affordability. Public schools, the cornerstone of the American education system, stand to lose the most from these proposed cuts. Reduced funding would translate into larger class sizes, fewer resources for teachers and students, and the elimination of essential programs like art, music, and physical education. These cuts would disproportionately impact low-income schools already grappling with limited resources, further exacerbating the achievement gap between affluent and disadvantaged students. Higher education faces a similar fate under this budget proposal. Cuts to student aid programs, including Pell Grants and subsidized loans, would make college increasingly unaffordable for students from low and middle-income families. The rising cost of college, coupled with reduced financial assistance, would force many students to take on crippling debt or forgo their dream of a college education altogether. This would have long-term consequences for social mobility, as access to higher education becomes increasingly limited to the wealthy. The proposed education cuts represent a short-sighted approach to fiscal policy, prioritizing short-term savings over long-term investments in the nation's future. By undermining education, we are undermining our future workforce, our capacity for innovation, and our ability to compete in the global economy. Cutting education is not a path to prosperity, it is a path to decline. The agricultural sector, a cornerstone of the American economy and a vital source of food for millions worldwide, faces an uncertain future under President Trump's proposed budget. The administration's plan to slash $300 billion from farm assistance programs over the next decade has sparked widespread alarm among farmers, ranchers, and agricultural experts who warn of dire consequences for the nation's food security and rural economies. Farm assistance programs play a crucial role in supporting American agriculture, providing a safety net for farmers facing unpredictable weather patterns, fluctuating commodity prices, and international trade disputes. These programs help to ensure a stable and affordable food supply for consumers, while also supporting the livelihoods of millions of Americans employed in the agricultural sector. The proposed cuts to farm assistance programs would have a devastating impact on small and medium-sized farms, which make up the backbone of American agriculture. These farms, often operating on tight margins, rely on government support to weather economic downturns and natural disasters. Without this vital safety net, many farms would be forced out of business, leading to consolidation in the agricultural industry and increased control by large corporations. The consequences of these cuts would extend far beyond the farm gate. Food prices would likely rise as the supply chain is disrupted, disproportionately impacting low-income families who already spend a significant portion of their income on food. Rural communities, heavily reliant on agriculture, would face economic devastation as farms close, jobs disappear, and local businesses struggle to survive. The proposed cuts to farm assistance programs represent a threat not only to American agriculture, but to the nation's food security and the well-being of millions of Americans. And so, as the wealth of the few continues to grow at an astonishing pace, the struggles of the many persist. It's a paradox that raises questions about fairness, opportunity, and the systems that govern our world. You can't help but wonder, is this the way it has to be, or perhaps is there a better path forward? Tariffs, they are often touted as a tool for protecting domestic industries, but they can also lead to unintended consequences like higher prices for consumers and strained international relations. The risk of a recession looms when global trade slows and businesses face uncertainty. It's a delicate balancing act, to say the least. The stance on Russia during Trump's administration raised eyebrows across the globe. Critics questioned whether it signaled a shift in traditional alliances. And then there's NATO. Uncertainty surrounding America's commitment left allies wondering. It's a situation that frankly left many searching for clarity in a time of geopolitical complexity. Questions of judgment and influence, well, they're not new in politics, but during this period they seemed to take on a sharper edge. Decisions made at the highest levels faced intense scrutiny. Who or what was shaping these choices? It's a question that lingered in the minds of many. Economic stability and global leadership, two pillars that are undeniably intertwined. When one falters, the other often follows. The stakes couldn't be higher as the world watched closely. Would the United States maintain its role as a stabilizing force, or would uncertainty prevail? Only time would tell.